Okay, so we had a little bit of a technical glitch there and everything kind of came to a grinding halt. So we're going to pick back up where we were and I'm going to let Stan continue his conversation. Thanks, Stan.
So I was talking about one of the principles, which is to minimize redundancy in communities. And so some people believe there should be a community that anyone wants to start should be allowed to thrive and grow, and we'll figure out which ones survive and which ones fail, and over time it'll take care of itself. And what I was saying is that that's not necessarily the way things work. That if you have too many choices, people won't make any one of those choices. They'll just say, I can't figure out which community to join. And I definitely saw that when I took over the global program at Hewlett Packard. There was a proliferation of communities. There were thousands of them, and none of them were very successful.
Yeah.
So one of the first things we did was to do a drastic consolidation to get down to having just one for each important topic. And when you do that, multiple benefits accrue. You get simplicity. People can figure out which one to join because there's only one. You get all of the people who have expertise in it together in one place rather than split apart into multiple. And then over time, because it begins to function well and people can see that, and they can see that their questions are answered and that they're learning about the field, it grows and it thrives. So I was giving the example of a community at Deloitte called the social media community, at which at one time there were 10 different social media communities, none of which were successful. And we took steps to combine them all. We talked to all the owners of them to say, couldn't we do better if we combine forces? And people will resist that and they'll explain to you why they need their own. But if you can get through to them that they'll actually be better off if all the people interested in social media are in one place rather than in 10 places, then eventually we got down to one social media community and then took off and grew substantially and did well. So I think that's what you want to strive for, is not to have one of everything and not one for every geographic region and for every little sub niche. You want to have them for as broad a topic as makes sense, not too broad where it doesn't mean anything, but
Right.
not so narrow that there's no one that's going to join it. And the other principle we talk about is that of critical mass. Communities have to reach critical mass to be successful. And often people don't believe that. They think that a small community is a good thing. But the reason critical mass is important is that there's a rule of thumb called the 99-1 rule. 90% of any community will never post or do anything at all other than perhaps follow what's going on. 9% will post maybe once in a while or once, and 1% will post more frequently. Now, people will sometimes lament this rule and claim that they want to overcome it and that everyone should be active. And there's a couple of problems with that. First, that will never happen. It's almost like a law of nature. Despite every attempt, 90% of people will tend to be passive, but that's not bad. As long as those 90% are learning, that's good. And if what if 100% of the community were posting? What if in my SICM community, 1,100 people posted every day? We would have a mess. So the fact that only a small number post is a good thing, not a bad thing, because if the right people are doing that, the other 1,100 people are benefiting, they're learning, they're seeing the benefits of all that. So you don't want small communities. They will always eventually become inactive. You want them to be large. And what should a large community be? Well, given this 10% that will ever post, you probably want it to be 100 or more, right? Because 10% of 100 is 10 people. And if 10 different people are posting, that's enough diversity of thought to be valuable. But if you had a community of 10 people, that means that one person would, if anyone, would be posting.
Right.
So those are some of the important principles I wanted to touch on.
That's great. And I wanted you to also talk about maintenance, because I mean, how is it that you've been so successful at running SICM for so many years? You know, what is it that makes this community work, and how do you keep it going?
Right, that's an excellent question. It has to do with a couple of things. The leader of a community is very important. So the idea that you might have a kind of a self-managed community, those sometimes exist, but not typically. Typically, you need a community leader that plays a role that keeps it going. So what does that include? It includes starting it. They have to actually spend some time and energy more upfront than later on to get it off the ground. They have to go off and recruit members till they reach that critical mass. And then they have to schedule some events, like we have the monthly calls, And they have to make sure that if they have online threaded discussions, that those are happening, and more important, that people are responding. So
Mhm.
nothing is worse for a community than someone who comes to the online discussion and breaks through their fear and nervousness about exposing themselves, and they post a question in the group, and then they get no answer. I mean, that's the worst thing, because they went through all that, and for what, right? And so then if someone else comes to check out the community to see whether they might want to join it, and they see that someone asked a question, there was no answer, why should I join this community? It's not going to do me any good. So you've got to make sure that A, there is regular activity so the community seems to be alive, doesn't look like it's dead. And B, if somebody asks something, they see that there are answers to come. So one of the functions that I play is I monitor that, and I make sure that we're not going through long silent periods. It's okay to have silent periods. You don't want to have noise all the time, but you don't want to go week after week in a
Mhm.
community with nothing happening. So one of the roles is to make sure if nothing's happened, that you make something happen. Maybe you'll post something. Maybe
Mhm.
you'll ask someone else to post something. So,
Mhm.
so keeping that active is one role. Then making sure that they get the answers. Sometimes the answers just come and you just go, good, that answer came. Sometimes the answer didn't come, but you know the answer. So you wait a little while to make sure you're not always the one who's the know-it-all, but then you'll answer it. And sometimes you don't know the answer, but you go off and find someone who does and ask them if they'll answer it. So you do whatever it takes to make sure that no question remains unanswered after a while. And that's another thing that keeps those discussions lively and active. And if someone comes to check it out, they'll see, oh yeah, look at all this good discussion. I don't want to miss out on it. I want to join. So those are kind of the basic things. And then you monitor if something goes wrong, if things heat up, if somebody says something wrong, you privately go and deal with that. As I said, I haven't had to do that hardly at all. And the other thing I do is I curate the discussion. So if discussions get started up in the wrong thread, I'll split them and put them back together in the right one. If they don't have the right hashtag, I'll add the right hashtag so we can find it later. Those are just some basic curation tasks that you do. But most important for any community leader is that they have to actually want to spend the time. They have to be passionate enough about the subject themselves so that they'll spend that time without griping about it. I'm doing this because I love this field and I want to see it prosper, so I will spend the time it takes to do the things I mentioned. And most communities fail because they don't have a leader who feels that way, and over time they'll stop doing those things. They'll stop making sure that there are activities, and the community will become inactive. So if they have the time and the energy and the passion and they do the basic stuff,
Mhm.
it doesn't really require that much time after a while. It's just monitoring, making sure that it's still running smoothly.
That's great. Really good. Very good. Yeah, I know I posted on KM for Development was having a debate about disinformation and sort of a debate about news sources and the media, that sort of stuff. And I teach information literacy and my PhD's in communications. So I had some opinions about it. So I thought, well, rather than get into the fray of it, I'll just give them a link to a beautiful chart that shows the rankings of the credibility and authoritativeness of the different news media outlets in the United States as an example. Nobody responded to me. Nobody, not one peep. And I thought, okay, well, I didn't need to say that, did I?
Well, there's a couple of comments on that. One is there's probably people that definitely read that and it mattered to them, but they'll never say a
Yeah,
word. All right.
yeah.
So that's that 90% rule. So I find that all the time. When I travel around, I'll run into someone and they'll say, oh, I really enjoy reading your stuff. Now, they've never commented or liked or responded in any way. So I realize that's the norm. So people obviously did read your post, but you got no feedback. So that's comment number one, but that's normal. And comment number two is if you had wanted a response and you didn't get one, then
Should
the
say,
role of the moderator is to see that.
yeah.
And what I'll do in a case like that is I will then comment as the moderator and say, hey, nobody's responded to Kendra. Any thoughts on that? And almost
Mhm.
always that will trigger people who said, well, I don't know if I didn't think my comment would have been all that meaningful, but now that you've asked for it, I'll give it, right? So sometimes just a little nudge is all that it takes to get some people, and they're holding back, but now that you've asked them, okay, I'll respond. So I think that's another role of the moderator is to do that nudging function. I don't do it that often because the community is really good about it. If you had
It
posted that
is.
SIKM, you probably would have gotten responses without any further intervention. But if you had asked a question and there was no answer after a couple of days, you would have seen a post from me saying, Hey, can anyone help Kendra? And almost always there would be a few additional replies.
Yeah, I have seen you do that on SIKM, and it's been really, really good to prompt lots of discussion, actually. And the nice thing I really like about SIKM is if somebody comes on and says, I've never done knowledge management before, I have no idea how to start, I've been hired into this job with no expertise. Can anybody help me? And it's amazing how wonderful the community is and comes around them and circles them with all kinds of great ideas, offers to talk offline. It's been a really wonderful community to watch and be a part of. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion recently on Chat GPT and the other AI uh, programs that are coming up. And I've learned tons about AI from that. I started my career in AI and in expert systems before there were neural networks, and I didn't do anything after that. So it's been really nice to hear what's going on and what the future is. And we've talked about that in several of these interviews. But I have to say that SIKM has been a very good source of information, not only about ChatGPT, for example, but also the link to where to get it. How do you use it? What are the concerns about it? What are the issues around it? So it's been, for information and knowledge professionals, it's been a really great resource to bring you up to speed on things you may not directly be involved with, but are going to impact what you do in time anyway. So it's a good thing to know about, it's for this class, issues and trends in KM. That's a really good resource. SIKM touches on all of those things. So, and the calls are also really, really helpful. And I think whether you're a student or whether you've been practicing a long time, it's really nice to hear those calls and you've made them available, you record them. And so when I have a meeting, I can't go. And so, it's great for me to be able to go back and follow up on the ones that I really wanted to hear. So that's always great. So thanks for all your good work in that. Yeah.
Well, one of the things you touched on there is the culture of a community. I've written about that. I
Mm-hmm.
think the culture of our community is one that's very supportive. And the fact that most of the leading thought leaders in the field are members of the community, but that they don't come down in sort of a condescending fashion on
Mm-mm.
anyone who's
No.
new. That's part of our culture that gets reinforced. So it should feel safe to someone, but the fact that you can, at no cost to you, reach some of the leaders in our field just by posting in the community. Think about the power of that. The reason why I'm such an enthusiast for communities is, the ability to tap, in this case, let's say hundreds of the leading thought leaders in a field, and have them respond to you with useful wisdom. That's a pretty powerful concept. And so that leads to one of the things that I like to talk about is the promise that you can make about communities. It kind of goes like this. If you have an organization and you make it your point to have communities of practice as one of your programs, or maybe your only program, if you'll do a few simple things, you can make it work really powerfully. First of all, you decide that you want to have a community for every important topic to your organization, at least one, probably just one for each one.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say you identify that there are 20 key topics of importance that people really care about. Then you to make it your goal to try to have a community formed for each of those 20. Then you'd have to start to work on finding leaders for those. That's work. But if you find them and they each launch those communities, and then those communities start to grow, and you start making it an expectation of the company that everyone will join the community that's most relevant to their work, and they do, then if they all join and if they all pay attention, that's another important part. It's not enough just to join, you have to actually follow what they're talking about. So they subscribe, they get their notifications or the emails that let them know when a new discussion has started, and they pay attention. Well, if you do all of those things, and if everyone in the company belongs to at least one community, including the one that's most relevant to their work, and they all pay attention, and you have all the topics covered, then what can you do as a promise? You can promise anyone who has a need, a problem, a question about any important topic that if they go to that community, they'll get what they need. And that's a powerful promise. You can't really make that promise about much, right? You can't say, I promise you, if you go to the search engine, you'll find the thing you're looking for. You may or you may not. But if you say, if you go to the community and post, you'll get an answer. Think about the power of that. So to me, that's why I'm such an enthusiastic supporter of this, because I've seen that power in action, and you've seen it in action in SIKM. So if you have any question at all about knowledge management and you post it, someone who knows about it will respond to you, and usually multiple people with different backgrounds, different perspectives will
Mhm.
respond to you, and you get a rich set of responses that you could not otherwise have gotten.
As a researcher, I'm reminded that, the SIKM group could be a completely wonderful data set for research. Oh no, there's another project.
Well, we actually did that
Oh,
one
did
time, and
you?
that was when this debate came up about whether the 90% rule was real or not. There were several people at the time that had written articles claiming that it was not. In fact, it was, in fact, some other different number, 70% or 60% or 50%. And they didn't base this on any empirical data at all. It was based on either survey data or just impressions they had or whatever. And I thought this is really bad. And we've got to do some actual research to find out what's an empirical number, not speculation. So we used three different examples, but SICAM was one. And my friend Leila Romero, who was my colleague at at Deloitte, excuse me, he and I worked on this together, and we took the SICAM data and we said, okay, let's go look through it for a year and see what's the percentages. We found that the percentage is higher than 90%. It's like
Wow.
95% of SICAM never posts.
Huh.
Uh, as a result, anyone who claims otherwise, think about this. SICAM is made up of knowledge management practitioners. If anyone understands this or should, if it was going to be a violation of the rule, it ought to be in the knowledge management community. But no, we're worse than anyone else. So consequently,
Yeah.
the data supports the idea that despite the fact that we don't know why that number is what it is, it's nonetheless a real number. And we proved it again. We used the internal Yammer network at Deloitte, and it proved the same thing. And we used some other examples, but we used real data. As far as I know, it's the only real data that's ever been applied to this that proves
Huh.
that 90% is more than a rule of thumb. But we also don't know exactly why it is.
Well, there you go, Stan. We'll be having to talk about that offline. Well, thank you so much for this great overview of communities of management. I want to just check in with you and see if there was anything else that you wanted to add, and then ask you to address any closing suggestions or advice for our students that you might like to share with them about their lives as upcoming KM professionals.
Yes, I would. I think back to when I started out in the field of knowledge management, okay, which is now 27 years ago. I remember going to a knowledge management conference 2 years later in '98, and there were essentially my heroes of knowledge management speaking to me. There was Carla Odell, and there was Larry Pruzak and Tom Davenport, Etienne Wenger, and and at the time I was relatively new to the field. I didn't think that I had anything much to add to these uh, thought leaders. And later on, I sort of eventually figured out that maybe I did have something to add. But we all don't think of ourselves as having anything all that special. Right? We're just people working in the field, and these other people are the experts, and we learn from them, and we read their books, and we listen to their talks. But in fact, what finally dawned on me later on when I was taking over knowledge management at Hewlett Packard, I had asked one of my colleagues at Ford if he would come talk to us at HP about best practice replication, which we could prefer to call proven practice replication. And they had a program that was quite successful at that at Ford, and he talked to us about it, and I was appreciative of that. And then he asked me if I would come talk to Ford about knowledge management at Hewlett Packard. And I thought, well, what am I going to talk about? Is doing anything that's special? We don't have anything as impressive as proven practice replication at Ford. But I figured I owed it to him. I better come up with something. So I went and I presented the KM program of Hewlett Packard to Ford. And what I was surprised by was how enthusiastic they were. As if what I had to say was more interesting to them than I expected. And then I realized that maybe we're doing something good, and that other people outside of HP appreciated it more than the people that I was directly serving. Often that's the case. People don't appreciate what you're doing for them, and they'll tell you all the things that are wrong with it, not the things that are right. But an outside perspective is different.
Yeah.
So that encouraged me then to maybe think about it differently and to think about speaking at a conference that led eventually to me, the APQC conference that I mentioned. Did we
Okay.
freeze again?
Yeah. Hang on one second. Let's see if we can make this work. I'm going to try turning off my camera for a minute and see if that helps. Oh, that did. Okay, keep going. You're good.
So at that time, then when I got to speak at conferences, then I thought, well, maybe I can write something. I remember sending in a little article to an online publication at the time, and they published it. And I was surprised. So I guess the point I'm making to all your students is that think of yourself as having much more potential interest than you might think of on your own, and think about what you could add in terms of your own writing, your own speaking, your own innovations, and take what you learn from other people and build on it. But the idea that you should think about writing and speaking about the field, not only getting involved in a community, but being active. And as I mentioned, only 10% of a community will ever do anything. Why don't you be one of those 10%?
Right.
Think about presenting on a call, or think about posting something to start a discussion in a community like SICAM. And don't be afraid. Realize that, yeah, you're going to be one of a small percentage, but that you can do it, and then there'll be benefits. And once I kind of broke through that and began to be a frequent writer and a frequent presenter, that just feeds on itself. It builds your confidence, it builds your connections. It really helps you to go from there. And it led to me being able to write books and do other things that I would never have thought that I would have done. So I'd say, start out by consuming all the good content other people have created and read and learn, but then start to try to write about it. What does it mean to you? What are you synthesizing from these different people? And then from there, you can build a career that goes beyond just being a practitioner, but also to becoming a thought leader of your own.
That's really interesting that you would bring that up. You're a member of our KM advisory board. And when we revised the curriculum and went through all the new courses, and we created that 1 credit hour thought leadership in KM and professional development, that's something that we talked about is how do we raise awareness of KM as a field? And this is one way to do that is through the participation and putting out books, putting out articles, talking to lots and lots of people, because we're doing a project right now where we're tracking KM jobs, and there's a lot of KM jobs, but there's nobody that's designated as a KM educator except for the 3 programs in the U.S. that we know of, and the job numbers suggest that there could be a lot more room for the discipline or the field to really become more not standardized, but brought together, that there's some room for that. But we also want the diversity of opinion. And I think that's something that we took into account when we were revising the curriculum. And so the thought leadership class is talking about, that's one of the things we'll be talking about, is exactly what you're talking about, is how do you do that? And posting on SIKM is a very important thing for them to do. And I encourage all of our students to join and to participate in that. I know we have a student who's doing that pretty regularly right now. And I hope that more of them will jump on board with that as well, because I think it's a great way for them to get a foot in the door, meet the people who are really the thought leaders right now, because there are thought leaders of tomorrow. So
That's right.
yeah.
And if they have a chance to speak at an event, we're having the Midwest KM Symposium coming up that you're hosting at Kent State. It's a great opportunity to not only attend it and learn and to network, but also to help plan, organize, speak. There are a lot of things that people can do that can get them ramping up in their profession.
That's right. And I've already sent the students a note through our KM student list. And so they'll be hearing more about that ongoing, because I have to maintain that community and make sure they know about it. So yeah, that's great. Stan, thank you so much for participating in this interview process. And I know you'll be hearing from some of our students along the way. And thank you so much for sharing your expertise and taking the time to be with us today.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
All right. Okay, we'll see you later then. Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye.